This painting is way too much fun. I may never finish it. No, I better get on with it. Well, hello and welcome back to the studio. Today, again, something very different. Now you saw from that little tiny clip at the start there that this painting was so absorbing. I could spend days on it, and I almost did. Yes, it's a Ford 1932 Coupe, I believe, and I've done this from two photographs, the car from one and the background from another photograph, just to show that you can combine two images into one. There's also lots of lovely detail here. I painted metallics, dents, localized colour and some abstract, non-local colours. If you want to know all that means, then watch the video, but make sure you watch it all the way through. There are lots of tips and tricks from start to finish as always. So, you know the routine. Sit back, comfy chair, notepad at the ready, and get ready to rev those engines. Happy painting, people. Here's my canvas, but it's the wrong colour. I want it to look old and rusty. I'll use some acrylic. Now, this tube of acrylic is, well, not very good quality. This one, on the other hand, is much better. And I just really want to tone the canvas down. Get rid of all the white and don't make it look too neat and tidy. Remember, we're painting an old car full of rust. So don't tidy things up. I said, don't tidy things up. I don't know why I bother. I got this image from Pixabay and printed it on some A4 sheets and taped it together. Now, I want to line this up so that I'm sort of focusing on about a third the way across the canvas and maybe a little bit below the horizon line with the headlights. It's really the sort of face of the car. Now, usually I would use graphite pencil on the back and then just use a biro, but against this brown background, well, it just doesn't show. Now then, special shout out to my friend Annie Troe. I saw her using pastels to transfer the image. It's a great tip and it works perfectly. I'll leave a link down in the description for her channel. Now, let's carry on tracing on the outline of the car. Thanks, Annie. Worked like a charm. Perfect. So there you go. Now we've got the outline onto our canvas. But this, as I said, is in chalk and it would rub off quite easily. So we need to find a way of fixing this onto the canvas. And that's the next step in my painting. And if anyone recognises the model of car, drop a comment down below. I don't recognise it. Anyway, on with the painting. The first colours on my palette are Prussian blue and some dark sienna. And I'm going to use a few drops of odourless thinners, but tiny little bits. And I'm going to be using these old round brushes, nothing special. Take a few drops of that odourless thinners. And I want to make a sort of thinned out dark sienna colour. The idea is to make just a thin wash, something I can paint with that will dry quickly onto the canvas. And to fix that outline, I'm just using this really more as a guide coat. This is a lovely technique for glazing over an outline. And as you see, some of the original rusty brown colour we applied still shows through. It sort of gives the canvas a nice patina. Now, the inside of this car is very dark and shadowy. If I mix dark sienna with Prussian blue, I end up with a really almost black colour. And as you see, it glides on very easily. Now, I'm using my homemade marl stick. This is a way of supporting my hand as I paint. It means it gives me sort of a rest that I can move along. It's also perfect for doing straight lines where you want to just use it almost like a ruler. This old car has got plenty of straight lines on it. I'm going to use a bit of time lapse and just block in the darkest areas first. There. Now you see how I can glaze this wing with just a small amount of that thinned dark sienna colour. All that lovely texture shows through. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed painting this. It was just magic. So here's my old timer after just a few minutes of work. The beautiful thing is that the thinned out paint dries almost instantly. It means that you won't smudge it. And as you see, you can just work one layer straight on top of the other, adding drops of thinners here and there, but don't overdo it with the thinners. I'll carry on blocking in my car, adding each individual panel. With every subsequent layer, my car becomes more and more realistic. Especially down here, I want to deepen this shadow. But don't be surprised if later on I come back and redarken some of this. As you see, it's dry to the touch. But I really need to do something about this background. So my painting's coming along rather well. Now you can see how I used glazing techniques to get this lovely rust effect on this old timer. But I really do need to look at this background somewhere, and I've got an idea in mind. I'm going to borrow one from another photograph. Sit tight. To start my painting, I'm going to be using some of this Bob Ross liquid clear oil paint. I want to apply a thin coat to the background. I've got some here in a small airtight container, and as you see, I'm using a very old Bob Ross brush to scrub it on. Don't worry too much if you just touch the car. You can actually go over the edges quite a bit. If you don't scrub it, it won't move the original paint that you laid down to get the outline. But remember, apply this very, very thinly. I'll scrub this on and go up close to the car and over the edges a little bit. But I'm going to sort of stop by the headlight. Now for my first background colour, titanium white and a little bit of yellow ochre. I want to make a sort of warm, rich background. You see the reference photograph we're going to be borrowing the background from. It's got that lovely warm background sky. As you see, this is almost what they call a Naples yellow colour. Notice how you can go over the brown background colours and it sort of obscures most of it, but you can leave it semi-transparent for a little bit of background information and detail, even in the sky. Let's add a cloud or two. I've used the same brush and gone straight into some dark sienna and put a little fresh blob of it out. Now, lay your brush at an angle and just tap. You can build these clouds up slowly, layer upon layer. If they're not dark enough, reload your brush and keep tapping. You'll see in a moment though, it's possible to make a little bit of an error here. I'm sort of going at a nice angle, which I think it looks quite attractive. But, well, you see, it does look like I've sort of got 3 fingers worth of paint there, doesn't it? They're sort of stacked up. I'll blend this out with the side of my brush and soften it down. But, yeah, this here just looks a bit too sort of nice and orderly, doesn't it? So the trick is to link 1 or 2 of them together. Sort of breaks up the symmetry a bit. I've left a few little patches of light peeking through from the background. Now dry clean your brush and just gently brush out some of those brush marks, but again don't overdo it. I want some background hills, and I've got a fan brush and a touch now of Van Dyke brown, so I just toned it down a bit. I want to think about putting a nice hill in the background. Just want to tidy up the edge of my sky. As you see from the reference photograph, there's a burst of light coming just over the hillside, so I'm going to leave that little open area there. But I think this needs to carry on as though you can still see the hillside through the windows of the car. I'll blend this in very gently, but again, I don't want this to be too dominant. I want the background to be, well, background. I don't want it to be challenging the car for your attention. Now, same brush, I didn't bother cleaning it much, straight into some Indian yellow. I want to add a sort of a warm sort of glow effect, as though there's sort of a misty layer here. I think this is dawn, and there's a nice sort of misty murky effect coming right along here. Tap it well and let the paint start to blend together. As you see, I'm going to go over the edge of the hill here and just soften the details up. Don't worry about the car, we can find that again in a moment. Now I switched to a nice dry clean brush here, pure white paint, and just with it on the corner of the brush, just tap. but keep that corner towards the horizon line. Don't turn it over, or you'll end up with a halo. As you see, just tapping gently, let the paint diffuse and go over the edge of the hill. Once again, oil paint is the most beautiful medium to work in for these sorts of special effects. You can play with them and adjust them to your heart's content. I'm adding a small amount of Indian yellow and titanium white to that nice brush. I want to sort of do some nice highlights on these clouds. Imagine the light shining up and just making them sparkle. As you see, it doesn't take much. Just a few taps really makes things pop. Again, do a little and stand back. That's my top tip for this painting. Stand back. You hear me say it quite often. But you really only see what you're painting when you're a few feet away. There, I think that looks about right. Now, dry clean your brush really, really well. Get it all nice and soft again and unclogged with paint. Now, use the side of the brush, which is the softest part of the brush, just to smooth down and stroke these clouds. But don't overdo it. They tend to blur into the background. I'm going to chance brightening my sky one more time. Just a little dot of pure white colour here, and just tap. I want that really intense bright colour of a rising sun. Doesn't matter though if I overdo it. I can always tap on some ochre and calm it down again. Let's just re-establish a few details of that background hill, but I don't want this to be too dominant. I want it again to look really faded by the rising sun. Once again, don't worry about the car. It's still there. We can come back and find it in a moment. Time to add some nice scrubby bushes. I've gone back into the Van Dyke Brown dark sienna mixture, and here, using just the corner of the fan brush, notice how I just stab into the painting. I'm sort of playing this colour off against that lovely misty murky background we put in. I don't want, again, these to be too dominant or too bright, so I let the paint run out quite a bit. A few more touches here and there just to give the indication that these are sort of more in silhouette. I could add highlights to them, but then it might draw your eye to them a bit too much. Again, I go back to my titanium white with a little touch of Indian yellow and tap in maybe some nice grass that's sort of gone yellow and died a bit in the heat of the desert sun. I let this sort of bump in to the base of those background bushes. Again, I'm just trying to soften them. I switch back once again to my old brush. I go backwards and forwards between new and old. This time just to tap in some of that dark Van Dyke Brown sienna mix. Create that lovely soft edge. You always know which brush I'm using if you look at the end of the handle. My old brushes have little orange dots on them. New brushes, like the ones I got recently, don't. They're just plain white. Let's add some more of these lovely bushes in here. And again, I don't want to come down too low. Another layer of that lovely golden grassy colour. No detail here. I want it to look further away. But I did add a little touch more of the Indian yellow and some of that sienna, just to tone things down. You'll see what I do with that later. Now, where's this car gotten to? I'm going to use one of my old favourites, a cotton bud, just to go over the edges and tidy things up a little bit. I know it's a little bit murky here and there, but that's okay. The outline is still perfectly preserved, and I can see exactly where things need to be. Now, I'm using a small flat synthetic brush for this next step. I want to add the indication of a little bit of light shimmer just on the edge of the bonnet, or if you're in America, the hood. Metallic surfaces act just like water in the fact that they're like a little mirror, so you always have to think about where the light could shine and where it would reflect. Go back to your reference photograph frequently and have a good look at it. This painting's a little more tricky because, well, the background on the car are from different photographs. But happy accidents are easy to remedy. Remember, as Bob would say, it's your world, and we have artistic license on our side. That old Ford Mustang had a lovely bush behind it, all scrubby. I'm going to borrow that and put it behind my old 32 Ford. I think it's a 32 Ford, but please correct me if you know differently. I'm going to just touch in a few markers. You know, I like to plan where I'm going with the painting, especially with these sorts of details. They could just become sort of, well, a bit too big. Now here's a neat little touch, something you should remember. When you're adding detail, especially sort of through windows and things, I leave a little bit of an unpainted edge. It's called a lost and found edge. You'll see again in a moment. As I come down behind the car, I don't paint right up to the edge of the back of the car. I leave a tiny little reference around the edge, a little bright halo if you wish. It makes sure that my painting doesn't blur together. It's a small thing, but it can make a huge difference to your paintings. I'll just add a few light touches of paint at the edges here to make it look as though, well, I've got sun rays coming through from the background. So as you can see, I've done my background for this painting and I really haven't made too much of it. I don't want it to overpower the main subject, which is, of course, this old timer. But can you now see that there is a need for some work on the car, where once this was the dominant feature, now with all this background, suddenly this is looking, well, a little bit flat. So we have to turn our attention back to the foreground of our painting. Now, this is an important factor when you're doing your own paintings, to remember that you have to sometimes work in the background and then in the foreground to get a balance for your painting. So let's add a little bit more depth of colour to the old timer. Time to bring our car back into the foreground. I'm using that flat brush I just dry cleaned with a little bit of Van Dyke brown. I want a nice dark chocolate brown colour for this, and I want to add a little more shadow to the roof. As I mentioned, it was starting to look a little bit flat. This is the stage of my painting where it can really become 3D. Again, I'll use my little marl stick to support my hand. Add little dark accents here and there. Again, think about where the light would strike, or where it would leave a little shadow. Now here's a neat touch. I brought some Prussian glue over with my Van Dyke brown. This will get you an almost black colour, but maybe with a little bit of a brownish tint to it. I'm going to go back over some of the darker areas and re-establish some lines. So the shut line, maybe a little bit more of a dark shadow here. There's a few nice little touches I'm going to include, a little bit of rust, maybe deepen up the shadow a bit. I did say I would add more colour there. Now, let's think about how this wing has to have a nice curve to it. And on the reference photograph there's a nice sort of bright spot here at the front of the wing. That's right, I'm going to try and paint a metallic effect. So, if you've ever wanted to know how to do it, let's see if we can make it work on this painting. Fingers crossed. I'm going to use my small round brush, a touch of that grubby white, and my newly formed black colour, Van Dyke brown and Prussian blue. I want a sort of silver grey colour, a bit of a brownish tint to it, a sort of nothing colour really, hard to explain. But right in the very centre of that little circle I made is the bright spot. As you can see, I'm just using that sort of light grey colour and just crisscrossing out. Don't make this a hard shape. Keep it nice and loose and let the brush run out of colour. It's quite a magic effect. And not as hard as you might think. It just takes a little bit of time. Already I can see a metallic sheen appearing on the wing. I'll put some on the other side at the same time. Now, with a clean, dry, small round brush, nice and bristly, I want to dab and dot and just play. I want this colour to combine with some of the brown underpainting and some of the Van Dyke brown colour I just used to add shadow to the wing. Stand back often, and the more you do this, the more sort of aged and patinaed the wing looks, almost as though somebody's taken a hammer to it and tried to beat it out. Let's add some chrome trim to the grille. Here you see I use my marl stick like a ruler. I rest my brush against it and just roll up and down. It's a neat way of doing a straight line. I want to also add a little flash of light across the top of the window. If you enjoy my tutorials, don't forget, give this little painting a thumbs up. You can even subscribe to the channel. Doesn't cost anything, but it really helps me out to grow. Don't forget, if you do subscribe, click the little bell icon, and that way you will get a notification whenever I launch a new video. If you want to go one step further, you can even buy me a coffee. I use all the money to pay for new materials. Thank you. Let's look at our reference photograph. You see there's some nice patches of faded paint on this car. Now, I'm not entirely sure that that photograph is a real one. It looks a bit photoshopped to me, but I like the turquoise effect. I put out a dot of sap green. I'm going to take some Prussian blue and just blend them together loosely. Add a touch of white and you get turquoise. You can blend any colour you like. I put a little drop of odourless thinners with it again to thin it out, and once again I'm going to use my flat brush. Just want to add a touch of colour here and there. Adding these flashes of colour really help to break up what could be rather a boring brown toned car. Here you see I just pick out selective panels and just rub my finger over it to settle it into the painting. A little touch here, a little touch there. You'll also see I use some more abstract colours in a moment. Now here's a neat technique. I'm just laying my brush on its side and just dragging it across the painting. The original acrylic colour we laid down left a bit of a texture. It's the reason why I didn't try and smooth it out. I wanted it to actually be textured and rough. And by dragging my brush sideways across it, it sort of creates an automatic patina. I've used some very thinned out dark brown and black colour that I made earlier. I just want to indicate that there's, well, some rusting and some age, maybe some peeling paint. This painting is full of opportunities to play with special effects, and even if you're not into cars, I encourage you to have a go at painting something old and aged, maybe a suit of armour or an old doorway with some rusty hinges. The choices are almost endless. Now back into my Van Dyke brown colour, a drop of thinners on it. I want to try and paint a couple of nice dents. Pay special attention to where the depth of colour needs to be and how the dent looks. It's not just sort of sharp, it's smooth with a sharp centre to it. So the dent on this side in shadow is almost oval. Again, another dent with another sort of oval back to it. And I'll soften the effect with my finger. On the other side, I'm going to use some of this metallic sheen colour. Again, just a little touch, then smudge it with my finger. It's amazing how just two colours, carefully applied, can suddenly look like 3D. Never ceases to amaze me, and I've done it lots of times. Once again, have a go on a painting of your own. Maybe an old tin can, or a watering can, or just anything you have laying around makes a great subject for trying out metallic effects. Now you see me using what's called a non-local colour. It's just a fancy term for something that's a little bit more abstract. This time I'm going to be using a little bit more green. It wasn't in the original photograph, but notice how adding that touch of green somehow makes all the other colours really stand out. Experiment with non-local colours in your own paintings. There is a bit of an art to it, but once you get the hang of it, it's quite addictive. Let's start work on the foreground. Again, a tiny drop of liquid clear, scrubbed in well with an old Bob Ross 1-inch landscape brush. A bit more careful now around the edge of the car. Again, just a thin coat is all that's needed. Now I've changed to a Bob Ross filbert brush. It's a very old brush, nice and bristly, perfect for creating grassy effects. Some sienna, ochre and a touch of white. And notice how I stab that into the painting and create, well, it looks like little distant grasses. I'll add quite a few in this area, but notice I don't want to get them too bright. You'll see why in a moment. To add more grasses to my painting, I'm going to use this old 1-inch Bob Ross landscape brush. Notice how I drag it through some yellow ochre, some white, even a little bit of dark sienna. But I'm loading the side of the brush, not the tips. Patting it into the paint really sort of raises the bristles. And watch. Hold it against the painting and just gently press. With every stroke, I make hundreds and hundreds of little blades of grass. Vary the colours a little bit and build successive layers. This is just a smashing way of making lots and lots and lots of lovely detail. Anyone can do it. All the grassy details in this part of my painting are in shadow, so I'm just using more dark sienna. I leave them nice and shadowy. We might add a few little highlights just to make them pop. I've washed my flat brush in a little bit of odourless thinners, and whilst it's still damp, I go into some of my yellow ochre and white. I want quite a bright colour now. The light passing beside the car in this area, I want it to be illuminating some longer grasses. I want them to shine in the sunlight. I'll use the flat brush to add some stems and stalks. I'll use the side of this flat brush just to add a few nice seed heads. Again, make them glow in the sunlight. A few little touches is all it takes to bring this part of my painting alive. I changed my liner brush, again, with a colour that's not so very bright. I want it more to be in the shadows, just to add a few final touches of grasses, maybe a few little weeds that have died. Adding lots of detail to your painting is key. It adds a real sense of quality to your work. My painting just needs a signature, in red of course. And my old timer 1932 Ford Coupe is complete. So there you have it, a new challenge for you to try. Paint something old and rusty. Doesn't have to be a car, could be almost anything. But whatever you do, enjoy playing with metallics and different colours in places you wouldn't expect them. And if you like watching this, there's another lovely video to watch coming right along. I've got to click the button. I can't hold this pose forever. The silly things I have to do. I don't know.